Observations on sustainability of Christian hospitals, just a few. Number one, government support is not the secret to sustainability. We did a consultation on on hospital administration and so on like that in Kenya in, I think it was about the year 2000. And there were administrators, medical officers, not just from Kenya, but from Tanzania, Zambia, and Ghana. They come from quite far and wide. When the decisions are made based on those presuppositions that I was talking about, the same process has to be used to address those issues. And I believe the solutions are often within arm's reach. God would not put the solution to all of Haiti's problems in North America. So when you go looking for the solution to these things, you begin to realize that it could well be that those solutions are locked up in a very small space, about this wide, about that high. And if you could get inside that space, you would find the solution. Not just to hospitals in Kenya or Haiti. But that space, I believe, is about this wide and about this high. And it's riding around on shoulders of people like you and me, and especially the people from Kenya or Haiti who have the potential to release whatever is necessary to make the change occur. Like the people from Tuwutunu who said, we can do it, give us a chance. It's not, the secret is not government support. The secret is whether there's local ownership of the idea. Number two, psychological ownership is critical for local sustainability. As long as there are people with financial resources from outside of the area who can be turned to at the slightest provocation, the psychological ownership of that hospital will not be local. And number three, a long history of unhealthy dependency affects both the church and the medical institutions. What do I mean by this? If you're living and working in a situation where there is a dependent hospital, just take a look at the community around and see what the community is like. Take a look at what the church is like in that community, and you may find that the church has a dependency problem which is simply mirrored or reflected in the hospital, which also has the same problem. And one of the problems that the dependency syndrome reflects is the fact that in many places, churches themselves are dependent. They can't stand on their own 2 feet. Therefore, they can't engage in Bible distribution. They have to ask for free gifts from the Bible Society. They should be giving gifts to the Bible Society, not depending upon the Bible Society. So one of the things that I recommend is that if you're concerned about this, look at the whole situation. Look at the community itself. Look at the church, and maybe what you're seeing there is reflected in the hospitals. Now, let me talk for just a few minutes about how churches and hospitals change from being dependent to standing on their own 2 feet. What triggers the move towards self-reliance? By the way, if you wonder where I'm getting all this, why this stuff is in here, if you look at page 21 of the book that you were given, the program book, the top right-hand corner, there is a list of things that I said I would talk about, and this is one of them. So what triggers the move towards self-reliance? Sometimes it's through a direct revelation from the Lord. I know of 5 South Africans who said God spoke to them and told them, don't go overseas for money, get the money from your own people. That story I told about Reverend Bangu was just one of the 5. A direct revelation from the Lord. God spoke, someone was listening. Sometimes it's through divine intervention. You have God doing things like closing the door to China. That was no one's plan. No one had a 5-year plan or even a 50-year plan which calculated that the door would be closed. No. God did it. Through sound teaching of those who sow the gospel seed. In some places, the gospel was presented in a way that people just felt it's their gospel, it's for them, they want to give something back to God in thanksgiving, so sound teaching from the very beginning. Sometimes through sound teaching and practices promoted by committed and astute local church leaders. I wish I had time to tell you stories of African pastors who somehow had this compulsion that they need to get their people together and teach them about being born again, filled with the Spirit, and Christian stewardship. And then they saw the results of what they did through sound teaching and practices. Sometimes it's through a one-sided plan initiated by missionaries or other outsiders who created the problem of dependency in the first place. Sometimes missionaries say, look, we created this problem, we're going to solve this problem. And so the same paternalism which created it is the same kind of paternalism which they use to resolve. Sometimes outside funding is arbitrarily cut off. We just decided we're not going to do it anymore. Boom, finished. Sometimes it's through widespread and genuine spiritual renewal. There's a church in Ethiopia that received 85% of its funding from overseas. They went through deep troubles in that country, as you know, with the government changes and all of the horrible things that happened. Pastors went to prison. One of the things that happened was spiritual renewal permeated that church. And it wasn't long after all of that 85% of their income came in local and only 15% from overseas. Sometimes it's through serious restructuring of the institutions inherited from the past. One of the problems I've noticed is that the sheer weight of Christian institutions, whether they're hospitals or Bible colleges or whatever they are, is simply too much for a struggling church to handle. Without restructuring, it's impossible to manage. And so, and I have a whole section in the book on restructuring. Sometimes it's through a positive shift in attitude that occurs among missionaries. When missionaries figure out that, hey, what I've been doing here has been keeping these people that I work with from enjoying their privilege and responsibility. And there's a story on our website about a young man named Tim Mitchell. I would heartily encourage you, if you can go onto the website, to read that story of what he did that automatically resulted in, after a period of time, he was completely out of work. And he went off on a 3-month vacation holiday just to see what would happen. And at the end of 3 months, he went back to check because maybe he was needed. He went back to check and found that things were going so way and he didn't need to go back. No more needed. So what should Westerners do with all the money we have? By the way, what time do I stop here? What time am I?
5 or 10 after 9.
I've been rushing because I thought I was already over time. Okay. So here's this question. What should we do with all the money we have? I tried to address it a little bit a while ago, but number one, I think we should ask where it came from. And this raises the question of economic justice. How did we get so rich? Well, you know, the free enterprise system says, buy for as low a price as you can, sell for as high a price as you can, make as much money as you can, satisfy yourself with all the things you want, a bigger house if necessary, but a lot of other things as well. It's your right, it's your God-given right to buy low and sell high and make a lot of money. I read a little book some time ago on this subject. It was written by the president of Uganda. It's called What is Africa's Problem? And most of the book is about the success that was written by Museveni, the president. President Museveni. And most of the book is about the victory of his revolutionary army that took over after Idi Amin. But interestingly enough, on many pages of that book, he has something about self-reliance. And he says, for example, that Uganda should never import another safety pin into the country. We should only import a machine to make safety pins. I thought, great, he's talking my language. Then he went on to describe what's happening in the coffee market. And he said, why is it that every year a Ugandan farmer has to produce more and more bags of coffee beans to buy a tractor? In other words, I forget the exact figures, but it's like this year it will take 3,000 bags of coffee beans to buy a tractor, but next year will take 3,200, and the next year will take 3,400. Why do we have to produce more and more? Well, I read that and I began thinking about the implications. And it struck me that the tractor makers who live in Germany, England, USA, Canada, and so on like that, we make tractors all right. But every year we have to have, why do we have to have more money every year for our tractors? Because there is an increasing standard of living that we have to keep up with. And not only that, we end up with more and more things, but we also end up with something else which is very significant. We end up with excess spendable income as tractor makers. That's why we have to have more coffee beans than last year. Now, what are we going to do with the excess spendable income? And that's where people come to me and say, but God, what should we do with all the money we have? Oh. All of a sudden I'm saying, hey, how did you get so much money? Well, think about this for a moment. You have excess spendable income, and now you're trying to figure out what to do with it. How about giving it to Uganda in the form of charity? Oh, well, that sounds good. We'll take a short-term trip, we'll build a church building there, we'll give it money in this way, and then we'll help an orphanage and so on. We'll give our excess spendable income to all these things. Let me ask you a question. If you were a Ugandan coffee farmer, and you had a choice between a fair price for your coffee beans or a charitable handout, which would you prefer? And to me, it's quite simple. We ought to be talking a little bit more about economic justice and fair trade practices.